I want to go ahead and talk about anti-blackness, which is a subject that you discuss in your anti-blackness and you workshop,
Yeah.
available through your business, the High Priestess Consulting Company. I'm sure that over the last 10 years, you've met a wide range of people from varying forms and levels of severity of anti-blackness. And some people, I'm sure, were very enlightened by the workshops, and they were able to learn really easily. But I'm also curious about the ones who weren't as easy to teach. The people who you've taken to these workshops, and they kind of struggled with these concepts of anti-blackness. So looking over the history of the people that you've talked to during these workshops and just overall in your career, what can you say about the people who have succeeded during these workshops and why? And then what about the ones who perpetually fail and just continue to not get it?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I feel like I think it's a combination of things, right? So I think there's like varying levels of people who get it and people who don't get it. So I think the first obstacle is that if you're like not a black person, there are particular ways that no matter how well I explain it or how I articulate it, like folks just want to understand because you have to experience it, right? That's like the first piece of, I think, even just understanding anti-blackness in general, right? Is that for non-black people, there are ways that you will never understand it because you don't experience anti-blackness, and that's just the truth of the matter, right? That is part of the truth of living under white supremacy, is that for some of our identities, the way that we understand them is because of how we are experiencing certain things. So I think that for the folks who are able to get it as much as they can, they are willing to lean into that discomfort of understanding that there is only so much of a way that they will be able to get it. And they're also not fixated on um because there's a particular way that I have noticed that happens sometimes in DEI spaces, so diversity and inclusion, diversity and inclusive excellence spaces that are diversity, equity, inclusion spaces where folks, their fixation is on embodying experiences outside of their own, and like that's like not what being empathetic is. Like, you don't need to know what it feels like to be a black person to
Mm-hmm.
like to want to dismantle anti-blackness. So for the people who get it, they're not fixated on, I want to feel what it feels like to be oppressed. I'm like, no, that's not the point. That is not what we're asking for. The folks who get it are like, I want to understand how the way that I am viewing the world is limiting my ability to see how I'm upholding this harmful system. What behaviors am I participating in? What beliefs have I internalized that I am then acting on, either consciously or subconsciously, that is upholding this violence, that is harming you, like as the person facilitating this as a black person, and also like black people collectively, right? So those are the folks who are like successful in receiving the information. Um, the larger challenge is, though, and it's really funny too, because I was literally having a conversation with two black femmes yesterday. We were talking about this, is the difficulty with anti-blackness in general is that there are so many things that, in order for people to actually divest from it, they would also have to divest from these behaviors, these systems, these beliefs, these things that, like, in many ways that benefit them, which I go over in the workshop too, that a lot of people just aren't willing to do, right? Like, why would you want to divest from colorism, for example, if colorism like props you up? Why would you want to let go of that? Why would you want to give that away? So I think that that's um, what has been challenging just in general for toppling, I think, like racism and anti-blackness is people not wanting to give up the things that give them power under anti-blackness. The other thing that's also kicking our ass is a lot of people conflate anti-blackness and racism as the same thing. So sometimes people will be describing something that is anti-black, and then they will use the word racism. And I'm just like, no, that's not racism that's happening to you. That's anti-blackness. And they use them interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable. So one of the things that I say in my workshop is that racism and anti-blackness are like identical twins. And the only way that you can tell them apart from each other is if you familiarize yourself with them. And so I use that analogy because I actually grew up with people. There were two girls in my friend group who were twins. They were identical twins. And because I knew them and I was friends with them and I spent a lot of time with them, it was easy for myself and for my friends. We could tell them apart, because we knew them. We were intimate with them. They were our friends. We hung out with them often. But other people who were just meeting them, they were like, I don't know how to tell the difference between the two of you. And we always were just like, how can you not tell the difference between the two of them? They look completely different from one another, but that's because we were familiar with them.
Wow, that twin analogy I think is brilliant because that really does capture um, the essence of sort of that difference because you know when it comes to differentiating between anti-blackness and racism, it's like there are similarities and there are differences, and because it doesn't, you know, anti-blackness isn't a physical thing. It's not like a one thing. It's so hard for
Mhm.
people to really wrap their heads around like, well, what does this look like? Like how does anti-blackness look like in terms of behavior or like systems or shows or whatever. But you illustrating this sort of twin analogy is really great because like kind of like when you actually do meet twins, like you have to look at them like, oh, your eye is actually just a little bit different than the other person. So you
Mhm.
have that familiarity with actually engaging in these conversations. And you can't just diagnose it without really having a more depth understanding.